Hello. It is not unexpected that mental health is at the top of the business agenda for most businesses, largely as a direct consequence of COVID. The question I'm going to pose to you today, and hopefully also provide the answer to, is around the question of does physical activity improve mental health and illness? To give you some summary and recording our approach to mental health and illness, I think it is important to start with the distinction between mental health and mental illness. Mental illness is a health condition that changes our emotion, our thinking, or our behavior. And examples include things such as depression or bipolar disorder, and these can be diagnosed and treated. On the other aspect is mental health, and an individual's level of social, cognitive, and emotional health. And this is impacted by a number of actual external influences and stressors. What is important to notice and to distinguish is that people living with controlled mental illness can still enjoy good mental health. Health systems in general tend to over-focus on mental illness through allocation of treating resource and funding for admitted care, which is the black triangle on the onward treatment. My provocation is that more needs to be done below the iceberg. That not only benefits far more, but would also reduce the funnel of admitted care. Our experience is that at best 6% of claimants with mental illness need hospitalization, and we focus on delivering prevention and wellness to the majority, but also through focusing on exercise, healthy eating, mindfulness, and sleep patterns, and also looking at outpatient care for all of our members through CBT. There are three important questions for us to consider. The first one is, are mental disorders risk factors for other illnesses? And the reason I pose this question is if we ask the majority of the lay public about diabetes and its associated risk to other illnesses, such as cardiac disease, renal disease, blindness, cardiovascular events, I think the majority of the population would agree that diabetes is associated. If you ask the lay person about mental health conditions, I think most people will be at odds to actually agree if there is any association. In a study done in 2011, mental health is correlated to other medical conditions, such as coronary artery disease, diabetes, and rheumatoid arthritis. However, there is a weaker evidence that they are independent factors associated with mental disorders. In a study done in 2017, is that people with depression may have sticky platelets, and it's the sticky platelets that cause coronary artery disease. And they found that depressive disorder has a 64% greater risk of developing coronary artery disease, but it's unknown whether depression on its own is a risk factor. In a subsequent study, depression treated before the onset of coronary artery disease halves the excess risk of coronary artery events. And in a study in 2016, indicated that anxiety raises serotonin levels, and increasing serotonin levels and other interleukins increase platelet aggregation or stickiness. But anxiety is also associated with autonomic dysfunction, resulting in arrhythmias, an irregular heart or a very fast heart rate, and associated coronary artery disease. The risk factors that contribute to mental disorders are probably well known. Family history cannot be understated. The stressful life situations such as bereavement, postpartum depression, financial stresses, divorce, immigration are probably well acknowledged and known. Isolation is also a significant stressor. And during this COVID epidemic, we have all, in some shapes or forms, experienced social isolation. Alcohol and drug abuse, again, cannot be understated. Drug abuse includes cannabis use. Whether or not it is the trigger, or whether it is someone needs the trigger in order to have a baseline risk of developing mental illness, is still unknown. As the insurance sector starts to abide by the ABI's mental health standards by December 2021, there is a significant education piece and a need for more evidence-based research from which to better service customers with mental health issues and to better explain the risk factors that mental health plays in other chronic diseases and health risks. I think universally, if we ask most lay people, is diabetes associated with other cardiac conditions, vascular conditions, risk of strokes, risk of blindness, risk of kidney diseases? I think the majority would answer yes. If you ask a similar question for mental health, I think the lay people are a lot less informed. On the other aspect of education is educating the actual industry as well. For example, what explanation is given to a highly functioning customer who has controlled anxiety, or to a customer who has a history of depression as a consequence of bereavement that is no longer treated, and whether they'll have exclusions applied to the insurance policy? The third important question is, does exercise help? And there is now increasing evidence that exercise may play a real important role. In 2018, research indicated that the brain-derived neurotrophic factor increases with exercise, and this reduces depression risk by about 17%. In a study in 2009 by Harvard Medical School, showed that exercise lowers the total cytokines by reducing interleukin-6 and increasing the anti-inflammatory interleukin cytokine interleukin-10. And then in 2018, a paper indicated that increasing interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor are linked to major depression and anxiety. So there's definitely a bit of a cause and effect with interleukins and the beneficial effect that exercise can have on interleukins. And then a real interesting study for me was the one in 2016, which really indicated that individuals with anxiety are definitely less likely to engage in healthy behavior, and that's through reduced physical activity, but also through increased cholesterol as a consequence of poor diet. So not only are we thinking and believing that exercise can maybe reduce the incidence of depression, but unfortunately people with depression and anxiety also exercise less. Our own data points to the importance of lifestyle as a risk factor for mental health and illness. And this is from a survey we did in Britain's Healthiest Workplace, which is an annual survey that we ran. Obviously, last year wasn't a successful time to run one. Last one done in 2019, of which we had about 25,200 respondents. And it gives quite a clear indication of low activity levels have a higher percentage risk of depression. But what is interesting on this is that those who exercise extremely also have an increased risk of depression. And that links into body mass index as well, in that the extremes of body mass, morbid obesity and above, and underweight people also exhibit a higher risk for depression. And alcohol consumption, as I said before, was probably intuitive, but was maybe less intuitive is that in our teetotaler population, actually the risk of depression was higher than someone who drank less than 7 units. And it all comes back, I guess, to work-life balance, but also just balance. Balancing our exercise requirements, balancing our nutrition. The pandemic has placed increasing strain on people's mental health. We compared our pre-authorizations in 2020 versus 2019 and weighted accordingly. What is interesting on our data on mental health authorizations and pre-authorizations is that our product construct enables us to offer a far broader range of treatments to all of our members, such as CBT therapy. And what was interesting is that during April, the levels of pre-authorizations for mental health conditions deteriorated significantly. across all illnesses, but not at the same lower level as was experienced for cardiac musculoskeletal. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We all found in the early first lockdown it was a novelty. We were with our families that hopefully we all love. We weren't working from home. We weren't having to travel, and we were achieving a better work-life balance. As the lockdown has continued and second surges have ensued, so people have found it more and more difficult. And it'll be interesting to, once we get our data for January and February, but my initial understanding is that those levels are now up to about 120% compared to a baseline of about 100 compared to 2019. When we look at a similar survey we did with Prince Healthiest Workplace and equate it to a later survey we've just done in January and February of this year, and asking employees to report on their low life satisfaction levels, it increased significantly this year, and it is driven by seasonal. January and February in the UK are harsh months, but notwithstanding the fact that the second surge had happened, people were again locked down and things were becoming really difficult. When we looked at employers rating their mental health as poor or very poor, prior to 2019, it averaged at about 8%. In February of this year, it suddenly increased to 16.5%. Vitality's wellness and behavioural change program revolves around understanding your health, engaging in healthy behaviours to which you're then rewarded. The starting point is completing a health review, which includes a Kessler questionnaire score to assess your mental health. We reduced the question sets in early 2019, and that's indicated on the graphs by a sudden change in the baseline. However, that is now normalizing, so inferences can be made. The ideal is we would want everybody to achieve 40 activity points per week, which equates to 120 points per month. We know at the higher activity points, 120 plus, people's risk of mental stress is significantly reduced. And as the more inactive you are, so tracking people from 2019 into 2020, assessing their Kessler scores, looking at the active devices that are linked, assessing what their physical activity is, and then also then reflecting on not only what the claiming experience is, but going back and repeating a Kessler score in the following year. I guess the question is, well, how easy is it to achieve 40 points per week? Or as a minimum 120 points per month? And to put it into perspective, if you could do 2 heart rate activities a week of 30 minutes of heart rate activity, and you did 1 day of walking 12,500 steps and 2 days of walking 7,000 steps, you would achieve this goal. If you look at the line above at 81 to 120 points, that equates to someone walking at a steady pace of 12,500 steps 3 times a week, which is really not excessive. I hope you agree that I've been able to evidence that exercise and physical activity definitely correlates to an improvement in the risk of mental ill health. And as such, please get active. Thank you.